neglect to tell you that after the urge to get high magically vanishes and you've been substanceless for maybe 6 or 8 months, you'll begin to start to, quote, get in touch, unquote, with why it was that you used substances in the first place. You'll start to feel why it was you got dependent on what was anesthetic. Getting in touch with your feelings is another quilted sample type cliche that ends up masking something ghastly deep and real, it turns out. A footnote 178. A more abstract but truer epigram that white flaggers with a lot of sober time sometimes change this to say something like, don't worry about getting in touch with your feelings, they'll get in touch with you. Back to the book. It starts to turn out that the vapider the AA cliche, the sharper the canines of the real truth it covers. Hello and welcome back to the library. Before we get lost amongst the stacks, I want to reintroduce this week's guest, Mr. Matthew Cortigiani, aka the Enigmatic Aviator. Welcome back, Cordo.
Thanks so much, Phil. Thank you for having me.
I wanted to start this week because I didn't have a quote set out just yet, and I've just found something I flagged last time I was reading this about how AA started, and well, we'll probably chat a little bit about David Foster Wallace substance abuse and his time over at the Ennett House, or what would be the Ennett House. But welcome. Do you have any expectations for part 2?
No, I'm excited to just talk more about his background and learn more about how it's affecting all his literature. It's been really interesting so far.
Yeah, where we left off, we were talking about his first publication, which was The Broom of the System, a 500-page Goliath, for lack of a better term, that he used as a senior thesis in his undergraduate degree, which was getting published while he was getting his master's degree, and he was only 24 or so. I actually used a photo. I found something on Twitter that I'm going to call it Twitter. I refuse to call it anything else other than that. That's my form of protesting today. Yeah, it found it on Twitter of a first edition copy that somebody said, I can't believe this was David Foster Wallace, and he looks like he's 23, 24 years old. It's actually kind of crazy. It's before he started wearing bandanas on his covers. Now, here's what I would do to summarize the plot, but frankly, a lot happens in this 500-page novel that includes a ton of psychological concepts to Ludwig Wittgenstein's principles, the philosopher that this guy loved. And the title, The Broom of the System itself, came from something his grandmother would say, which is cute. It's just going back to the whole thing that everybody in his family were a bunch of smarty pants. I will leave it as this book, which has 3 separate subplots. Again, that 3 separate subplot, I think, is anybody who's read Infinite Jest understands where he's going with that. It focuses on the life of Lenore Beadsman, a young woman working as a switchboard operator, and is largely based on dealing with her neurotic boyfriend. His name is Rick Vigorous, which is a ridiculous name. Go read it if you like David Foster Wallace's works. I wouldn't start with this one, honestly, just based off what I read, because I think it's even headier than Infinite Jest, and you need to have a lot of background to understand Wittgenstein's writings to fully understand what he's trying to say. And frankly, it's his first one, so there's going to be a lot of rawness to it. It's not going to be as polished, and he wrote it in a course of a year, realistically. I've also, frankly, never kind of read philosophy's sake, so I can't recommend anything because I just don't understand Ludwig's full philosophical works. This is a postmodern book, which was a reflection of the books he read in his undergraduate studies and the ones that he loved, with unreliable narration and experimentation throughout the way that it was structured. So, again, very similar to what he would write in his other 2 novels. Any questions about this book that I may be able to answer, dude?
About the one you were just describing, the broom of the system. Well, how would you say it's less polished? Because when I think of Infinite Jest, I guess brevity and conciseness and polishedness doesn't exactly strike me immediately. So I'm curious what you mean by that.
It's a good point, because that's not necessarily the most polished book. Infinite Jest is arguably one of the most edited and re-edited a book until it was published and sent out to publication that I've ever heard. So,
interesting.
The editor and David Foster Wallace really did a ton of communication back and forth, and all of it almost via mail, which is even crazier, snail mail in the 90s. The Broom with a System, I think basically David Foster Wallace allowed almost any kind of editing to be had from the editor itself. And, you're just a younger writer. You're not going to have as much skill in writing. So,
I see. Oh, thanks.
yep. One of the main criticisms and accomplishments of DFW's writings is that he rarely writes stories with satisfying endings.
Right.
You'll find that soon. I don't know if you finished IJ. Yeah.
I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's hard to spoil that ending because, again, there really isn't much of one. This began even from his very first novel, where Howard, the editor, his editor that helped find him, told him, quote, "You cheat yourself as well of the opportunity to write a brilliantly theatrical close to the book," unquote. He urged the young author to stick to, quote, "the physics of reading," unquote, by having some kind of concrete ending, regardless if it has a comedy or a tragedy, something along the way. And DFW loved this phrase, "the physics of reading." He wrote, quote, "I admit to potentially irritating penchant for the anticlimax," unquote. 100,000% true. If you want to read a book that gets boxed and covered in wrapping paper with a nice little bow tie on top, stay away from Wallace. I knew this before reading the works I've read so far, so I was prepared, and this does not bother me per se, but like, if you're curious about his work and you want to hear about super uber heady psychological or philosophical problems and principles mixed with experimentation of form, that's the book you're going to get for, right? That's really it. And then, IJ has a lot of personal stuff that we're going to actually highlight up until his book publication today. As I was saying, Dave was still getting his master's in fine arts, a complete great master's to get if you want to have a high-end paying job. It was writing really, really high, obviously sarcasm. Sorry, he's not getting an engineer degree here.
No.
Yeah, it's a great master's. Again, for the schools listening to this, please accept my application. He was hiding really high off of publishing what was effectively one of his senior theses, and he also knew that he had to continue publishing if he wanted to stay relevant at that age. Since he was getting an MFA, he was already writing short stories for his professors. So he approached his literary agent about publishing a short story collection. She didn't love the idea because these don't fucking sell. They really don't. When was the last time you bought a short story collection, realistically?
Unless it was mandated by a public school education program. I've never done it.
Yeah, I do it because I'm a nerd. But yeah, it's rare. And I mean, honestly, I rented out the short story collection I read by DFW for this Goliath of a script. So yeah. It's not something that people read as much or as often, but arguably more than poetry. So, who knows? Not really winning any arguments here.
Yeah, you're published in what was it? What field? Poetry?
You got it. So before we get to the point of his short story collection, DFW needs to fulfill the requirements for his master's. For him, like many, this meant teaching classes at the University of Arizona, where he was attending. This would be his first teaching gig. It made him very nervous, and he dreaded the first day. Again, like when he got super nervous, he got physically ill at times. So I think before the first day, he actually got physically ill as well. Once he was put in front of a class, though, a flip switched in his mind, and he just excelled. He was able to just excel at almost anything when it came down to the literary or the philosophical, when it comes down to like any part of it, realistically, that he put his mind to. He quickly learned that teaching is as much performance as it is providing people with the knowledge to excel in that course. He also learned that he would need to be a professor in some kind of capacity, less so later in life once he was more established, we'll find out. But in order for him to become a writer, he needed to do that earlier in life. He did not like teaching. He was a bad teacher in some ways because he was a fucking huge hard ass, and we'll get to some of the things that he did later on in life. He called people out when they were they were kind of the same cocky that he was when he was in undergraduate school. He would call them out for being it, which is like, it's a little hypocritical. And he eventually developed the habit of grading papers 3 times in 3 different color pens. First was for grammatical reasons. One was to go over any suggestions that he had, and the last one was to read the story as a whole after all that, which getting a little bit ahead of myself because I think this happens later when he was teaching, not the first year, but still, that's the kind of meticulousness that you would have when he was a professor and you were studying underneath him. During his first year, he was so successful at being a first-year professor, a teacher's assistant. He wasn't a professor, he was a teacher's assistant, right? But he was actively teaching classes because that's just the way that they save money for not having tenured professors. He was so successful that he won an award given to the best teacher's assistant at University of Arizona. Wallace, because he had a sense of humor and also he had a bit of hubris himself, he made every member of his class attending come up to him individually and place an apple on his desk the day the evaluator reviewed his class.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I know. He still won the award. It's just a pretty funny. I don't know if it's a prank. I don't know what to say. It's
pretty tongue in cheek, but that's how he writes too. So it's on brand.
Totally. It was also during this time, after winning the Whiting Award, which he won for publishing The Broom of the System, and during the summer of 1987, that David Foster Wallace was invited to Yaddo. I think it's pronounced Yaddo. It's Yaddo, which is an artist retreat in Saratoga Springs, New York. Not too far from us at all. This is a very prestigious retreat that allowed for him to work on his short story collection. That's why he did it. That's why he went there, essentially. He got accepted because of the Broom of the System, and he was the only person around 25 years old at the time. He was very, very young. Everybody else was a bit older than him, being the youngest person at the retreat at that point. When he was attending it, I don't think it was at the point ever, like he didn't break any records for that. Just to directly quote from Yaddo's Wikipedia page, here's what I mean when I say it's like very prestigious. Quote, collectively, artists who have worked at Yaddo have won 82 Pulitzer Prizes, 34 MacArthur Fellowships, which is the Genius Scholarship. It's considered the Genius Scholarship in the United States. 70 National Book Awards, 24 National Book Critic Circles Awards, 108 Rome Prizes, 49 Whiting Writings Awards, a Nobel Prize, and many other accolades, unquote, which is crazy. This was a short retreat, ultimately, and allowed him to continue writing that collection. He would also meet a lot of connections in the industry there. Now, I'm going to pivot a little bit here to describe Wallace's lifestyle. So any questions about the accomplishment or Yaddo? It's really close to downtown Saratoga Springs. So,
yeah, that's fascinating because I've never heard about it. But man, it seems like it's really, really prestigious.
I've never heard about it until reading about him, honestly, which is crazy, and doing some investigation. I stopped at Saratoga Springs on the way down to Thanksgiving because we needed a break, and I keep forgetting how absolutely gorgeous that city is. It's like
you wouldn't think. I just and I think of them, I think of like the racetrack and gambling and stuff, but I've never really been there to kind of check it out.
Yeah, it's got a lot of affluence to it too, so it's nice. It's very surprising at times. Yeah,
I'll add it to the list.
Yeah, you should visit it. The hot springs, that's why it's called Saratoga Springs. It's what it's known for. So, or originally. Okay. So if you have any, I don't know, if you're suffering from tuberculosis or any other of those old-timey diseases we're trying to resurrect.
Yeah, Hot Springs, Arkansas is booked up, so you could go check out Saratoga.
Nice. Yeah, it's a driving distance away too. So I guess it doesn't really matter to you. You can fly anywhere you want in the world. So
well, yeah, but I mean, if I don't have to go to the airport, it's kind of a win at this point.
Yeah, why mix work and pleasure if you don't have to?
Yeah, go to work on your day off.
Right. So pivoting to Wallace's lifestyle, I mentioned this in the first episode, but I think it's the beginning of his sophomore or junior year as an undergrad. He started to wear those stained tennis shorts and the grubby t-shirts that would best be described as an outmoded bandana around his head. It was a very late 80s, 90s, early 90s look. He was also an incredibly heavy drinker all throughout his early college up until his MFA, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. I mean, very heavy drinker, and would habitually smoke marijuana cigarettes, like a lot. Like he smoked a lot of bong mostly. He was a massive stoner, which is rad if you do it in moderation and aren't destructive, and you're hurting the people around you and yourself. He also took a lot of drugs. A lot of it was prescribed, like Xanax, but he also experimented with a lot of psychedelics, which again doesn't sound like a single individual I've ever spoken to or associate with to this day.
No way.
He would also regularly decompress by watching television for hours to days at a time, watching reruns of all sorts of what I can imagine was a mixture of early dramas that now define the streaming generation to just utter trash television. It's just imagine the 80s and the 90s that's the stuff he's watching right now, right? Yeah, a lot of Oprah probably towards the end too. And I know we've all binged watched TV. Almost everybody who's ever listened to it, it's an incredibly normal thing to do. But his depressive personality and his addictive personality made these episodes take a different significance, which I think one of the greatest examples of this was and I was going to add it to the last episode, was the description he had of the person who would watch MASH all day, every day in Infinite Jest. And it's just a description of him losing himself completely into that addiction, right? Yeah.
Writing about himself.
Yeah.
It seems, yeah.
Yeah. He wasn't a toe tipper. Everything he did was full on. The lifestyle really didn't slow down his writing abilities at times, or at least at this point in his life. He would compile the short story collection, and then with that collection, there was one novella. To get a sense of his stories, the collection opens with a short story called Little Expressionless Animals, which is set on the game show Jeopardy, with Alex Trebek being one of the main characters. The others being two lesbians with odd childhoods is the description I heard. Put a pin in the story. He also writes a story where an actress appears on David Letterman, so very contemporary to what he was writing, the Letterman show, right? And also, Alex Trebek and Jeopardy. The titular story, which is called Girl with Curious Hair, is about a young Republican who associates with punks and a girl who is on acid that is obsessed with somebody else's hair. Wallace's biographer mentions that this particular story was actually a spiteful reaction to a bad relationship he had with a woman. Put another pin on this relationship too. There's a lot going on here. The last story I'll mention is, quote, Westward, the course of empire takes its way, unquote, which is the longest piece. Categorically, it's the novella, where many believe can be read as the precursor of Infinite Jest, though I didn't read this one. So that's just where I got. And jumping back a little bit here, and I forgot to do this in the top of the episode, but the main source of this is Every Story is a Love Story, A Life of David Foster Wallace by D.T. Max, and almost every quote is going to come from there. Yeah, any questions or first impressions about like these stories that I mentioned?
It's just been fascinating to see how personal all his writing really is, and I'm kind of curious. Does David Foster Wallace continue to write short stories throughout the remainder of his career, or does he kind of leave these in the past once he starts getting to these heavy hitting big novels?
No. So, well, actually, great question. We'll talk about the way he cycles through literature, because there's actually a cycle to his writing styles too. I'm going to look this up really quick. I know there's at least one other short story collection that I will talk about, but I'm not sure if there was one that was published posthumously as well. I think there might be one as well. So tick tock. Yes. There wasn't posthumously. It was published when he was still alive. So there's 3 short story collections.
Interesting.
Yeah. Again, great question. We'll talk about the way he writes literature. So remember that first pin I said about the story about Alex Trebek? Yeah. His agent had a really hard time selling the story and this book originally because potential legal ramifications. Specifically, that story involving Jeopardy, the show, had many lawyers protecting the show's intellectual property. And DFW's story included real life examples of what occurred on like an episode itself, not necessarily, the characters outside of Alex Trebek, like the two lesbians, as they're described in the description I read, but the actions that they do, and as well as using Alex Trebek's real name, which honestly, you just saving your ass from a lawsuit 101. You don't use people's real names in stories.
Sure.
The only reason why South Park gets away with it is because they have that disclaimer, that says that we're doing these impressions poorly, right? So like, you can't really do that with stories as easily.
Sure.
It also can be considered plagiarism. You're stealing somebody's intellectual property. And I'm on Dave Foster Wallace's side. He had a hard time understanding how his portrayal of art could be denounced as plagiarism, as is only a reflection of reality itself. What really sealed the deal with a potential suit was when he added something he overheard somebody else say one day at a cafe when he was out in the world, right? The young man who was sitting next to him was joking to somebody, and he said, quote, "My favorite word is the word moist, especially when used in combination with my second favorite word, which is loincloth." Yeah, this is the type of humor that DFW is known for. And he had in his story Alex Trebek say these words. So on top of everything else, he's being a little offensive.
Yeah.
So he returns back from Yaddo in Saratoga Springs to Tucson, where he works temporarily at a bakery. And then his correspondence with his agent is mostly about toning down the references of his short stories so he doesn't get sued. Still, a publication called the Paris Review said, "Nah, dog, we don't give a flying fuck. We're from Paris. Give us some of that Jeopardy shit right to the vein." And they published the story. He won a short story fiction prize, earning him a much-needed infusion of $1,500 of cash back in the 80s. So, still got it published. I think they have different laws over in France. Dave also tries to get sober at this time, realizing his drinking and drug use is out of control. He gets a sponsor and begins going to AA meetings. One of the things he learns from this program is you need to apologize to everybody you hurt in your life. It's one of the things that you do in AA. Now, I understand the sentiment, but I can also see how annoying this can get very quickly. Like for Wallace, one of the things he apologized for was exaggerating his SAT scores to impress a girl. Like, fuck it, all right, dude, that's not something you need to apologize for.
Yeah. Hope it worked.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. The early stages of sobriety left him pretty down in the dumps, spending several hours watching TV to recuperate every single day. But he did start to feel better. He started mulling over getting off his prescription drugs for his depression, which is Nardil, as we described earlier. But his sponsor advised him correctly that meetings were not a substitute for a medical opinion. Still, he goes off his meds by his own choice, and within weeks, he needs to go back to Urbana, Indiana, after suffering another psychological breakdown. He then overdoses on Restoril, which is a benzodrine, and he was prescribed for short-term treatment of his insomnia for, becoming sober. He was found unconscious and needed to get his stomach pumped. He was only 26 at this time. When he tried to get back on the antidepressant, the Nardil also no longer had the same effect. It needed more and more of it at this point. He would eventually get used to it again, but before that happened, the only way to say it is he went to electroconvulsive therapy. ECT is what we just talked about in the first episode. It's literally shocking your system and shocking your system out of depression, which is nuts. It's proven not to work. It also causes short-term memory to vanish. Quite literally, it zaps your short-term memory away. You can regain it, but for the time being, you just can't remember anything. There's a famous country singer called Townes Van Zandt. I don't know if you're familiar with like 60s, 70s, 80s country singers, but he suffered from a similar mental illness, and he like lost all his short-term memory for the rest of his life, basically through ECT as a teenager, which is impressive because he still was a country singer, right? Like,
Yeah.
like, yeah, I don't know how he memorized his lyrics, probably with a lot of work. Townes Van Zandt was also like a legend of drug abuse. Like, let's do it as that. I could send you some clips on Instagram about the shit he would get himself up to. But okay,
Really?
yeah, just nuts. Kind of similar to David Foster Wallace in some ways. But the good news did come, even though the ECT fucked him up for a little bit. After weeks of arguing with the lawyers from Viking Penguin about the content of his short stories, the publisher W.W. Norton offered to purchase the rights to the upcoming short story collection, and he even paid for the $25,000 advance Viking Penguin gave David Foster Wallace, which is funny that Viking refused to publish this book because his biography was published by them a few years later, so a few decades later. A little ironic. We'll discuss later why DFW would have hated what I just said, irony, but you know, it is what it is. So Girl with Curious Hair was eventually published in 1989. Like other short story collections, it didn't sell great, but comparatively well for a short story collection. It's because he was kind of a known name in the literary circles at this point. He also graduated from the University of Arizona around the same time as publication. One of the key results of his time at U of A and Yaddo is that he becomes embedded in the writing scene and even becomes friends with people like Jonathan Franzen, who is more in the zeitgeist than you expect today. Are you familiar with Jonathan Franzen at all?
I'm aware of some of his work. Yeah, I haven't read any of it, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't actually either, and it was through this biography that I kind of am very interested in his work. You'd have to have been blind to not see his book Freedom and all over his stories like over a decade ago. Freedom was, the blue cover. It was just everywhere in every store and every
Sure.
library, right? If you are into reading, right? Like if you're not, I get it. But I don't know why you're listening to this fucking podcast. So yeah, if you were raised all your life, this is a question I'm posing, right? Cordo, if you were raised all your life in academia, literally since you were born with professors for parents, you're now in your mid to late 20s with, let's be real, very little work experience, but two pretty significant publications after. What's your next move?
Hide from the real world and go back to school?
Ding, ding, ding. We absolutely have a winner. You apply to Harvard University to get your master's in philosophy. He gets his admission to Harvard, and we are going to chat about that right now. But any expectations about David Foster Wallace and Harvard University, or no?
Yeah, I'm enjoying strapping in and joining on the ride. So now let's find out what happens.
Let's do it, because this is where things changed quite a bit for him. Now,
For the better.
he moves to Boston, right? Or Cambridge, technically, with his old college roommate, Mark Costello, who is now a lawyer. Mark Costello was the guy who wanted to be a priest, who graduated the year before him. They would have been the same age if David Foster Wallace didn't skip a year, right? Graduated double summa cum laude, or whatever it is. Wasn't that smart. He begins writing nonfiction at this time. So remember that cyclical nature of his writing? He just started to feel a little bit drained mentally from fiction. And a lot of his work at this point that he's writing includes book reviews and essays that he would get paid by other publications, minor ones, to write for. Like almost everything else he did, he wrote manically as well. Sometimes around 25,000 words a day, up to 75-word sentences. 25,000 words a day is insane.
Yeah.
That is a L. Ron Hubbard kind of esque work, like writing, and at least his writings, David Foster Wallace's writing is a lot better than L. Ron Hubbard's. Yeah.
A little more negative, but
yeah. I haven't read much by L. Ron Hubbard. It's just not good.
He knew how to bring people together. That's I'll give him that.
Yes. He made a couple of attempts of nonfiction books too, And these so writing nonfiction books, and these in hindsight will seem really silly, but it certainly was contemporary at the time. The first book he wrote about was the hip hop and rap scene in the late 80s, specifically about Public Enemy and NWA, who were huge at this point, but past that as well. The second book was about pornography. He flew out to LA to do some research on both. He went to porn sets and eventually attempted to go to Compton about the rap scene over there to go to a show, but he left before he even got there because he got too scared, which is pretty fucking funny.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Compton is still not known for it's still known as a pretty tough place. At least that's what rappers in the modern day portray it as.
Yeah, I think it's better than it was, but it's still not.
It's
not somewhere
much
you
better
walk your dog. Yeah.
Yeah, it's much better than it was in the 80s and 90s. And I mean, NWA releasing Straight Outta Compton the previous year that he went there in the summer of 1988. All of American public's perception of this Southern California city was pretty heavily with police corruption, drug dealing, and gun violence, which was portrayed by the artist, right?
Sure.
It's not controversial to say that, and the portrayal had to come from somewhere. So, he doesn't get a lot of work done over there, neither with going to porn sets and trying to figure out the rap scene over there. So he goes back to Yaddo to write the porn and rap books instead, where he got accepted one more time. Again, he doesn't get much done there. He's definitely smoking a ton of pot and drinking as he asks one of the attendees there to go fly and get more pot in New York City at one point, which she does. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but this is part of his love life, which is really complicated. But this person, he also had a short physical relationship that he asked to literally smuggle drugs on a plane from New York City to Saratoga Springs. Again, it was a lot easier to do back in the 80s, I'd imagine.
you would hope it's become a lot harder to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Smoking of all sorts is also strictly prohibited in this retreat, specifically inside, but he managed to get away with it just like any other college kid would do. Lots of fans cycling, lots of different scents, near the window, towel probably near the door. At this point, again, he was one of the most famous residents, actually. So he had a lot more leeway than other attendees because he already published two pretty well-known books, and he's publishing nonfiction works at the time. So a little difficult to follow the timeline here, as the summer was particularly busy for him, but he does start Harvard University for philosophy at what the biographer said was the improbable age of 27 for masters, which is silly to me. I know plenty of people who go to get their master's at the age of 27 or later. I think he just thought that was a lot older than most people, which is nuts. I think things were just different 10, 15, 20 years ago when this was written.
More out of college jobs available is probably the big thing.
Yeah, and a lot more jobs are requiring masters too. Yes. Yeah. And again, like, David Foster Wallace was a bit of a loose cannon. There's another story where he drank a whole bottle of scotch, fell asleep, and threw up in his sleep. He only survived because he was on his side when this occurred, which, again, he just kind of like shrugged it off. Harvard also, he sometimes hung out with other classmates, but it seems like everybody in this higher institutions were kind of jealous of him and these envious people who work hard at only proving their own intellect, specifically the teachers. The 6 or so other people in the Masters of Philosophy program, so it's an incredibly prestigious program, right?
Sure.
David Foster Wallace considered them to be too sheltered, which is nuts.
Sure.
David Foster Wallace was a pretty sheltered human being from reality, past the reality that was his own psychological illnesses, which is, very true. Like, he had a mental illness that was prescribed, which is its own tough reality. But, like, he didn't have the bravado to go see a rap concert in Compton, he was one of those guys.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know what I would do in the 80s of that, but I don't have to put myself in a position like that. So we'll see.
Right. Not yet.
So, yeah, not yet, right? One of these days. Oh, okay. So with everything that's going on, with the stress of him drinking, with the stress of the new Masters of Philosophy that he's getting at Harvard, a lot of work that he's doing, the short stories that he's kind of writing, but definitely the nonfiction that he's definitely writing at this point, and the small acclaim, albeit prominent amongst the literary community, and his heavy pot use finally makes him crack. He has another mental breakdown. Worried that he would flunk out if he missed any of his classwork, he told Harvard University he was going to hurt himself physically. This forced Harvard's hand to suspend his work assignments, and they placed him in a mental ward, again asking his roommate, Mark Costello, at the time, to bring some supplies, including a TV, because he thought he was going to be there for a while, which is true. He was going to be there for a while. So, that's one way, I guess, of getting out of schoolwork. It's the most radical and the nuclear option, but hey, it
Sure.
worked for him. Yeah. I've gone a crazy ways of getting out of schoolwork. Never did that. But then again,
I haven't gotten to institutionalization.
I kind of know somebody who did that in college, but again, he definitely needed it too. Yeah. So now I'm quoting D.T. Max's biographer about the time he spent there. Quote, "The 4 weeks he spent at McLean in November of 1989 changed his life." So McLean's the mental ward that he went to. Yeah. Continuing, quote, "This was not the first or most serious crisis, but he felt now as if he had hit a new bottom of a kind of a bottom. He had really expected it to be a phoenix. From the ashes to which he had reduced postmodernism, a new sort of fiction was meant to arise," unquote. This is an intense detox program. It was very intense. And after it was over, he was sent to a living facility named Appleton House, where they told him that he'd be dead by 30 if he didn't stop drinking and smoking pot the way he was doing, which I can't say if it's true or not. I have no clue if that's an actual fact, but, potentially. They might have just been trying to scare him straight, too. He then was either transferred or he moved voluntarily to another place called the Granada House, which was a working house requiring him to work 40 hours a week at a job outside the said house in order for him to have residency there. This was the place that directly influenced the Enfield House in Infinite Jest, but more on that in another episode when we talk about Infinite Jest specifically. This was his real first experience outside of academia with people who were largely convicts who were just released. He worked several jobs, sometimes as a janitor. Again, there's references to that. Sometimes working at a front office answering calls. His time at Harvard petered out, and he never got to finish his master's there because, well, he was busy getting sober. When he does get out, he catches up with a woman named Mary Carr at a recovery meeting. Now, before we get into Mary Carr, because this is where shit gets pretty crazy, do you have anything you want to talk about the other crazy shit that was in his life during the Enfield House, or the Granada House?
Yeah, so I'm kind of curious, especially that it's so heavily influencing the Enfield House and kind of everything in there. Do you think that he wrote any of the characters in Infinite Jest kind of based off himself and his own experience? Like, do you think he thinks of himself as Gately, or do you think it's more complex than that, or are we getting too far ahead of ourselves with Infinite Jest?
It's a great question. I don't think we're getting too far ahead of ourselves when I answer. It is absolutely 100%. He has characters that are directly influenced from his time at these drug rehab facilities. 100%. He does not think of himself as Don Gately. He's more of parallel to the Incandenzas a little bit there, but
I see.
I will talk about that a little bit more because there is a character that's directly who Don Gately is. And there's a couple of things that in Infinite Jest that really were kind of problematic that he needed to clean up too. Again, more on that later. So,
sure.
Mary Carr. Do you know anything about Mary Carr at all?
No, I don't.
Mary Carr was decently accomplished poet at the time. She was also in academia. She was married with a kid of her own, and she was an alcoholic. The two of them met before the stint at McLean House, so the intense detox place that he first went to, and would see one another occasionally at the Granada House since she volunteered there. Now, I'm going to go on a limb here and say that his behavior around Mary was problematic. In fact, it almost exhibited a stalker-like behavior, in my own words. Again, though, I'm not anybody who can professionally say that. I'm just saying what I think was occurring based off of what I read. This is quoting from his biography from DT Max. Quote, immediately, Wallace wanted to be involved with Carr. But Carr, who was in a shaky marriage and trying to protect her son, she says she had no interest. She sensed instability and trouble. We were both just shocking wrecks, she remembers. He bragged that she remembers. She also remembers he bragged that he had perfect SAT scores. He saw her, she realized, as some sort of mother/redeemer figure, unquote. The quote continues a little bit later down the line. Quote, Wallace did not hear the subtle variation in the word no. He knew only one way to seduce, overwhelm. He would show up at Carr's family home, shovel her driveway after a snowfall, or come unannounced to her recovery meetings. Carr called her sponsor and asked her to let Wallace know his intentions were not welcome. Wallace besieged her with notes anyway, unquote. Yeah. So this behavior, again, on a limb, not the best way to treat somebody that you're interested in, right?
No.
Yep. I know he's coming out of his own mental problems and he's latching onto somebody that is a motherly figure. That doesn't excuse what's going to happen with their relationship as we continue, right? You know, Mary Carr still, out of all things considered, had some sort of affinity towards him, whether that was the concept of trauma bonding, going through some shared experience of addiction. She definitely thought he was brilliant. I say this because she helped him get a job at Emerson College where he taught writing, which he hated. Emerson College is just kind of funny. Emerson's a prestigious writing school and it's great. It's great for the arts, but it's just like he hated his time there. I think partially because he was obsessed with Mary Carr. Sure. And he was also able to do this because of his previous notoriety, right? His earlier works and his college transcripts, which were impeccable, and they were not privy to the information that he just came out of an extensive rehabilitation ward. Funny thing is, what? Sorry.
No, I just whoops.
Yeah.
Yeah, casual omission.
Yes. That time before common background checks is an interesting time in this country's history. Yeah. The funny thing is, she didn't even like his writing that much. Like, she didn't like what he wrote, nor did she really like when he showed up with a tattoo of a heart with Mary's name inside of it. That's real. He had a tattoo of a heart with Mary's name inside of it, like some sort of freaking 90s cliche, or like it's Boy Meets World shit, right?
I can't believe she didn't appreciate it.
It's insane. It's insane. When the relationship didn't progress, well, this is what his biographer Max writes about again. Quote, he went to the Harvard Law Library and wrote her a note explaining how she could divorce her husband and still keep custody of their son and share of their assets. She showed it to her spouse, so the person that she was married to, because of course she would. It's insane. One day she looked out her window to find Wallace cursing her and demanding the return of a Walkman he lent her. Shows the time right there with that Walkman is that thing back then. If for those who don't know what a Walkman is, it's basically a CD player. Or some Walkmans actually ended up being the early MP3s, right, that we knew as iPads or iPods. But that's besides the point. When she threw the Walkman down to him, he took it, stomped off, and then put his fist through a car window, unquote. Yes, woof. Yeah, it's not great.
No, not a great look.
No. And we're joking about this. It's really, it's just stalker and harassment behavior. Eventually, Carr has to leave the Boston area, not because of Wallace's actions, but because of other job opportunities that she gets. Wallace falls into a fit of depression, partially because of her, but also because he felt very little meaning in his work at the moment, both academically and also because he was living from one struggling nonfiction piece after another. His book was eventually published, called Signifying Rappers: Rap and Race in the Urban Present. It was published in 1990, and it was co-written actually by Mark Costello, his friend and the person who helped him out in Boston, and a college friend, right? Wallace admits even at that point, the book was immediately dated because it was two white academics trying to talk about an art form that, frankly, they had very little to do with the culture that they grew up in, right? Very,
Sure.
very, very different people writing about this.
A little bit.
Yeah, it's something that definitely happened a shit ton in the 80s and 90s. I'm not saying that he falls into the depression because of this book, but all of his work as a whole, let's be clear. And it's 1990, right? Like when it comes out, NWA has been out for a couple of years. Licensed to Ill, which is Beastie Boys' album, came out at that point. Like rap is shifting so drastically at that. Like within a couple of years, we're having Biggie Smalls, right?
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, we're having the whole East Coast West Coast rap battle and all the crime that comes with that. So
Sure.
yeah, it's a very different world, like literally between those 5 years. So he falls into another fit of depression, mostly lack of interest in the work, it seems, right, and also because of Carr leaving the Boston area. This is the first time since getting sober that he is put on high dosages of antidepressants. It was around this time where he started organizing also a lot of his newer work, the one that he's best known for, In Earnest. Parts of Infinite Jest dates back all the way in the 80s, right? A lot of his stories came from the time when he was writing in rehab, and also some of it beforehand as well, which, again, we will talk about a little bit more in the later episode when as that book is published. One thing that is important in his newly found view of is his newly found view of irony. Excuse me. I didn't really know this about him, but irony was an abundantly used tool in literature at this point, and he refused to include irony in Infinite Jest, right? It seems, I was going to say the word ironic, but if you read a book like Infinite Jest, you think it's a ton of irony involved, but there's nothing that he writes on about it that is actually ironical in the literary sense. Right. I had to struggle through like some of the stuff that he wrote, and it's like, no, that's either a coincidence or that's just like maximalism. That is a very different thing that he's writing. Right.
I see.
Yeah. Yeah. He wrote about this literary device, irony, as, quote, irony has only emergency use. Carried over time, it is the voice of the trapped who have come to enjoy the cage, unquote. He also adds, quote, this is because irony, entertaining as it is, serves an almost exclusively negative function. It's singularly unuseful when it comes to constructing anything to replace the hypocrisies it debunks, unquote. I think that's a little hyperbolic. I think irony can help debunk some of the hypocrisies there, but I understand what he's saying at here. What isn't ironic at all is when David Foster Wallace attempts to purchase a gun illegally from an ex-convict to kill Mary Carr's husband. This ex-convict was somebody he met at the Granada House, and this individual did the responsible thing and informed the head of the Granada House, who eventually, who would tell Mary Carr, not eventually, that there was that line of communication there, right? When Mary Carr addressed David Foster Wallace about this, he told her that it was totally fabricated by this ex-con. That never happened. Ooh. No way. He would later admit, he admitted it later. This was his darkest moment, right? Yeah, he tried to do this, which is, again, he's not all mentally there, but like it doesn't excuse this behavior to try to murder somebody at all.
Right, of course not.
Mary Carr, right? She's left Boston. She gets a job at Syracuse University. I might not have mentioned this, but Mary Carr, again, was a very well-respected poet and academic herself. So soon afterwards, David Foster Wallace decides he wants to go and meet her because, well, her divorce finally settles. It was always going to happen. I don't think David Foster Wallace did really anything to help it or even push it along. It just sounded like ever from the beginning that it was a rocky marriage. But
Sure.
like the whole trying to hire a gun from a hitman thing or an ex-con thing is probably didn't help things.
No, it's probably misunderstood.
Yes, totally. Yeah, so he goes on a road trip with Jonathan Franzen, the writer. They were pretty close friends, and Jonathan Franzen is still very much writing, very much alive. Just to humanize this a little bit more into a reality that we both know, and putting a living, active, famous living author on this train wreck of a car ride. She makes both of them sleep on the floor, and they asks them to leave the next day. This is not what he expected, right? He expected her to welcome him with open arms. He packs his things and then moves to Syracuse shortly afterwards. Let's now say during this time, he's also pretty damn poor. He would survive off of potatoes and soda. He hadn't really much money before the drug rehab center, and he now had basically none since he spent a lot of it on therapists. He didn't have health insurance either, but I guess you could just pay out of pocket for these services still back then. It's way too expensive now.
A different time, yeah.
Totally. Like many in rehab, he also picked up a tobacco habit, specifically dipping, chewing tobacco, spitting in a soda can, and carrying a plastic bag in his sock to brush his teeth whenever he visited friends' house. And he'd be known for this all throughout his teaching career. He'd always have a fat lip as a professor, and even in small, quiet, intimate, like creating writing classes, and be freaking just spitting in a cup at all times. Just fucking something that you would not expect out of somebody, like have a baseball player's fat lip and a creative writing professor. Yeah, it's a nasty habit. I'm not trying to judge anybody who has a tobacco habit, but like spitting is just gross. Still in his sobriety, he also developed a weird relationship with his mother, who he blamed his substance abuse problem for. One of the days during therapy, he started talking about this. He convinced himself, with basically absolutely no proof or evidence whatsoever, that she had been physically and sexually abused by her father, and she suppressed this memory to protect him. He also blamed his failed relationship with women in his family dynamic, particularly with his mother, which is wildly inaccurate and honestly a little bit misogynistic in deflecting his own personal faults and blaming the first woman who showed him real love. And not in like that weird creepy way, just maternal love. Sure. He was not an incel, right? That's by no stretch of the imagination was David Foster Wallace celibate. And we will continue to talk more about relationships with women. Speaking of which, Mary Carr wasn't going great, as you can imagine. Now, the biographer D.T. Mack stated that multiple people said that she was also a bit hot-headed and could throw temper tantrums at times. But also he wrote a biography about David Foster Wallace, and the point of view through him he gives, I don't think he's really being the fairest to her. After all, his behavior could absolutely constitute harassment from what we've previously discussed. Now imagine somebody showing up to your house constantly uninvited. He also didn't write critically on Wallace's behavior about times. He just kind of said the facts. Doesn't really excuse Wallace's behavior either, really, which when Wallace kept pressuring Mary Carr to marry him. That was another thing he was constantly doing. Or when they were traveling one day and David Foster Wallace got mad at Mary and he literally threw her out of a moving vehicle. Or when he threw her coffee table at her and then he sent $100 for the cost. Her eventual response was to send a letter from her lawyer saying that he owed her more money for that table.
Damn.
Yes, I know. So it's going to be at the end of this relationship because it doesn't work out. It was never going to work out. And Wallace needing a change that we're going to end for today. We're about an hour in. It's just an example that needed to highlight about how again, I'm not trying to explain this away, but his mental health was definitely not in a good place right now, and this behavior is inexcusable. But hey, this is a life and story of David Foster Wallace. That's what
Yeah,
we're
it's not
here
gonna
to
be
talk about.
perfect.
Does this exceed your expectations?
This has been fascinating. I keep kind of circling back to it, but it's been so cool to see how he really, in a lot of his writing, he's writing about himself and his own experience, and to a remarkably accurate degree. So it's been really cool to kind of see, unfortunately, it seems like he kind of had a rough go of it just throughout most of his life, but that really contributed to what he was able to write so confidently and so expertly about.
Yeah, I mean the rough go. I mean it's really tough to be diagnosed with unipolar depression in such a young age. Does not excuse his behavior with Mary Carr whatsoever. So that's just, I'm putting that one out there.
Well, yeah, of course not. Yeah.
Of course, yeah. I'm not accusing anybody for excusing that behavior, but still, I guess it's a good time to plug my pluggables and talk about something else other than that. Obviously, I wanted to mention that, like, if you know somebody going through mental health crises, you just reach out to them. Like, you never know when people are struggling, and Wallace had the wherewithal to at least go through therapy. It's just, yeah, there was definitely times where he needed to take a break and step back from the insanity that he was portraying on other people's lives. Yeah. Yeah.
Very well put.
Yeah. So I have a Patreon, Lost in Library on Patreon there. Also, any questions, please send them to lostinthelibrarypodcast@gmail. Follow us on Instagram, again, Lost in Library there. I have a Substack, which is just my name at Fil Deptula. It's all under development. Do you have anything you want to add before I get to the sources and we close up for the day?
No, no, just thank you so much for having me, and I've been learning a lot, and I've been really enjoying the being along for the ride. So thank you.
Yeah, that's part two of David Foster Wallace's life. We are now going to talk about, from here on end, how he gets famous and what he does with his fame and his sobriety next episode. So the one spoiler I have is he does not fall back onto that train again. He stays sober. The monkey's off his back. So
Oh,
yeah.
good.
Source is Every Story is a Love Story, A Life of David Foster Wallace by D.T. Max. Some of the books I read for this one is Infinite Jest, Supposedly Funny Thing That I'll Never Do Again, and Brief Interviews with Hideous Men, which is one of the short story collections. I also used some Wikipedia articles about inverse cost equality law, the Broom of the System, Ludwig von Wittgenstein, and Yaddo for this episode. So
Yeah, anytime. Thank you for having me.
yeah, no problem.